On today's tiny apartment episode, we're building a sofa from scratch for the wall sofa bed system. Boom! If you haven't seen the Murphy bed construction yet, make sure to watch the previous episode so you have a better idea on how this is going to work together. We are now focusing on the sofa, and I'll show you how I made the plywood base and the cushions. There are plans available for this project on the link in the description in case you are interested in building one too. Some steps are easier to understand and visualize on the plans than here on the video, because you'll just see me measuring and cutting random pieces of plywood for a while. I used 18mm Baltic birch plywood as I did for the Murphy bed, and I chose loose tenons for the joiner in conjunction with pocket holes. Obviously you can use other methods for joining the pieces together and still achieve an extremely secure and solid piece of furniture. You can use just pocket holes, dowels, or even screws if you don't mind seeing little circles here and there. You can get creative with plugging the screw heads and doing something colorful like I did for the Murphy bed, for example. I just have been wanting to try new tools and speed up the joinery process for this one, as well as maintaining a clean look. Most of these steps would also apply if you're using a doweling jig or a router instead to make the holes for the tenons. At this point, things are starting to get three-dimensional. I'm connecting the 3 drawer dividers to the top. If I was going to glue the entire structure, I probably wouldn't need pocket holes, but since I like to keep the big pieces of furniture demountable, I'm not gluing anything. Who knows if it needs to get out of the apartment and then it doesn't fit the door or the elevator, or it's just too heavy to be manageable. In some cases, creating knockdown furniture with a clean look can be tricky, and the designing part requires more attention. Once I got the pocket holes drilled, I could start assembling the bottom section of the sofa, and since all you will ever see is the front edge, it's okay to have the face full of holes and screw heads. Just make sure that all the screws you apply are countersunk. This is starting to get huge for my tiny size. Once I put the structure on its final position, I can start making a quick template for the wall angle. As I mentioned before on other episodes, this room is ugly shaped, so there are some details on the furniture that will have trapezoidal shapes to fill in the gaps that make everything look just like if it was meant to be there. I mean, it is meant to be here. I kept doing more holes for the tenons and pocket screws because I was figuring out the building steps on the go. I had to unscrew some parts in order to attach other parts first because I really didn't want any fasteners to be visible. I could reattach the backer pieces as well. The bottom face will get rather ugly, but again, just make sure all screw heads are below the wood surface because it will face the floor and you will not want to scratch it. Here I realized I got the measurements wrong for the left arm support, and so I had to glue and cut off the tenons and remake them. Thankfully, it didn't matter to the looks as the mistake will be facing the floor. The bottom part got installed and I could focus specifically on the right arm section. This part was much harder for me than it is described on the plans because of the angled wall, and if you're following the plans you will see that it is quick and simple. I can keep cutting and transposing measurements to the matching pieces and will finally utilize the template I made a few minutes ago. To have the template on my disposal really made the job of figuring out the angles much easier. I made most of the cuts with a track saw, but a circular saw with a straight edge would work just fine. The track saw just makes it more convenient since no clamps are needed and the dust collection is much better. This is like cutting foam core with an X-Acto knife and a ruler, but with bigger tools meant to cut wood panels. Once the angle of the top piece of the arm was figured out with the template, I could understand that every time I needed to make an angle cut, that angle was always 13 degrees, or 77 if you are subtracting from 90. The tenons here work just like the other square panels, so there is no need to mess with drilling the holes on awkward directions. I find it much easier to bring the parts to each context and transpose lines and measurements right there than trying to measure with a tape measure or so. So this is the only piece that will be held in place with tenons alone. It will be just fine since it's a top and it really just needs to be sit quiet in place. What the fuck? One more little mistake that can be easily fixed by supergluing a strip of wood that no one will ever see, as this is a backing piece. Here you can see what I meant by being sit quiet in place. This is a snug fit and I can see no problem. Also, it received 2 pocket holes on the back. All is left to do is to remove any burning marks from the saw blade, sand everything smooth and apply a protective finish. I guess I just got lazy to film the finishing part, but I applied 4 coats of water-based satin varnish. Now comes a totally different part, making the cushions. I ordered the foam in 2 different densities. I chose a lower density for the back cushion and a higher density for the sitting cushions. The back cushions have a trapezoidal shape in order to create a slight angle for the person's back to rest against. The concept here is to make boxes out of fabric. It isn't as hard as you would expect. Think of it like if you were on school making cubes out of cardstock. You need to leave a border all around for stitching the parts together, and every time you change direction, let's say you have a 90-degree corner, you need to make a small relief cut in order to properly fold the fabric. Since I'm using zippers to open and close the covers to insert or remove the foam, it is much easier to work on that part first. So first thing is to insert the slider into the teeth, and I place the flat side of the slider body facing out and try to engage the teeth from both sides. To pull the slider, I found it easier to get started flat on the table than firmly securing both sides of the tape with one hand and pulling the slider with the other. The face that will receive the zipper needs to be larger by the amount of the zipper width, and once you have your rectangle cut, you typically fold it in half, but not necessarily, as I'll show you in a minute. It will depend on your design choices. It's a good idea to iron the fold, and it only takes a couple of minutes, but totally worth it. And then we will mark the center of the zipper with a chalk pencil. We can now sew along the marks, and it's better to use larger stitches as they will be easier to rip off later. Now we need to cut it in the middle, fold it over, and iron again to press it flat. Here is where the zipper will get sewn, and to make things easier for me, I used Wonder Tape to secure it in place. You can use pins obviously, but I don't have a good relationship with those. I'll leave the link below to this Wonder Tape. We can now use the zipper foot on the sewing machine and sew the zipper to our cover back face. When the middle stitching gets open, the zipper is revealed and we have a nice looking zipper closure. Of course, we need to remove all those little bits of thread. Once the zipper faces are done, it's time to put the fabric boxes together. Remember, you need to think that everything is being stitched from the wrong side of the fabric, so that when you unzip and unfold, you will then get the nice finished look facing outwards. As I explained before, it's crucial to make a relief cut when the fabric is changing direction. I really loved using this thin tape as it made everything quick and easy to prepare for sewing. Now it's a matter of sewing it, leaving about 12 millimeters or half an inch seam allowance all around. It's a good idea to reinforce the corners with some extra stitching. Once the entire cover is finished sewing, we can unzip it and turn it inside out to reveal the finished work. We can now insert the foam that has been covered with polyester batting. Inserting the foam can be extremely tricky, but if you fold it in half, it makes the job much easier. Then take your time going around every seam and corner to make sure the foam and cover are properly aligned. I want to make some crocodile pillows, so I might just do that now. I repeated the process regarding the zipper closure, only made it smaller this time. Okay, the rest of the cushions took less work as I basically spray glued the batting around the foam, but I wanted to repurpose a piece of foam I already had to make the left arm. That means I have to make several cuts to achieve the volume I wanted. To cut the foam, I just used a regular hacksaw blade, but it cuts really nicely on the bandsaw. I just didn't have a big bandsaw. It certainly doesn't look pretty, but that doesn't really matter as we're going to glue the parts together and the ugly faces will be positioned inside. I can now cover the foam with polyester batting that will give the final cushion a more puffed look. Okay, I already showed you how to insert the foam on the covers, so let's move into making the drawers. For the drawers, I used pre-finished birch plywood and started by cutting the sheet in two smaller rectangles that I could then slice into strips on the table saw. Alright, so I'm building 5 drawers in total and 2 of them have a trapezoidal shape to match the spacing near the angled wall of the apartment. So remember that I have said before that all the angles are 13 degrees or 77 if you subtract 13 from 90. Well, that was the angle I used to make all these angled cuts. Once I got the front and back pieces angled on one edge, I could start assembling and mark the final length for the longer side of the trapezium. I didn't use glue because the plywood is pre-finished, so it probably wouldn't do much, but as I was going to reinforce everything with screws anyway, it doesn't really matter if it's glued or not for strength. The other 3 drawers were easier to build as they had regular 90-degree butt joints. Once the boxes were done, I could begin the slides installation. It was pretty tricky to install these because there wasn't much space to work with the driver and I had to lay down on the floor and insert my arms or basically half of my body inside the structure for some of the drawers. I raised the box just a little to make sure it doesn't rub against the bottom of the structure when it's being maneuvered, and then attach the slide to the sides of the drawer box. Then I could remove the raising strips and check if it works fine. I repeated these steps for the other 2 big boxes, and the trapezoidal drawers were installed a bit differently. I couldn't attach the slides to both sides of the drawer as they are not parallel and obviously wouldn't work. So I decided to try placing one slide on the right side that is square and then place the second slide on the bottom of the drawer, making sure it was attached on a parallel line to the right slide. Even though they are not in the same geometric plane, as long as they are attached on a parallel position despite the orientation of the slide itself, they can work together. So I made sure to attach the screws exactly in the middle of the pencil line and transpose the same distance from the right slide to the center line of the left slide to the bottom of the drawer. The bottoms of the drawers are pretty thin, so I had to cut the tip of some screws so they were not poking into the drawer. I could then drive a regular screw just to create the threads on the plywood and back it off to then install the screw without tip. I put the left slide into place, and now it's easier to screw the right slide just like I did for the other drawers. Finally, I could work on the drawer fronts, and for that I used the same birch plywood from the sofa and Murphy bed. I cut some scrap pieces to size and carved the handle cutouts with my X-carve. If you wonder why I made the handles out of center for the bigger drawers, that's because when the bed is flipped over the sofa and you need to reach out for something that is inside those drawers, let's say a blanket or the pillows, you can open those drawers easily. Whereas if the handles were in the middle, you would need to bring the bed up on the wall again to be able to open those drawers. After some sanding and varnishing, it was time to attach the false fronts to the drawer boxes. I used some plain cards to make sure the gap was even all around for a better look. I used spongy double-sided tape to have the fronts to stick in place for a few minutes, and then drove some screws from behind to permanently attach them. I have tried regular thin double-sided tape, but it didn't work for me, so I would recommend going with this thicker foam tape. Alright, so thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a bit long, but I hope it was worth it. If you're interested in building this sofa, I got plans available in the description of the video, so make sure to check those out. A big shout out to all my Patreon supporters who really made this video possible. And if you're interested in supporting the show too, you can go to patreon.com/gethandsdirty and become part of the family. Alright, thanks for watching everyone, and go get your hands dirty.